At 12:54 in the morning, on a pitch-black stretch of Texas highway, a 26-year-old father of four called 911. On the recording, which you can still listen to today, he sounds out of breath, terrified, and he appears to say the words, "We're not talking to them. I totally ran into them." Then the line goes dead. Brandon Lawson was never seen or heard from again. Not by his family. Not by the police officers who arrived at the scene just minutes later. Not by anyone. And over a decade later, no one can agree on what he was even saying in that call. To understand how Brandon Lawson ended up alone on that highway, you need to understand the hours leading up to it. On the evening of August 8, 2013, Brandon got into a heated argument with his girlfriend, Lawson, at their home in San Angelo, Texas. The fight was bad enough that Ledessa told him to leave. So around midnight, Brandon did exactly that. He got in his white Dodge pickup truck and started driving toward his father's house in Crowley, Texas, roughly 300 miles away. But here's where the details start to matter. Brandon had an outstanding warrant for a nonviolent drug offense. He reportedly had a history with methamphetamine use. Some close to him later said he may have been using that night. Whether that played a role in what happened next is one of the central debates of this entire case. About 30 minutes into his drive, just south of Bronte, Texas, on a rural stretch of Highway 277, a road flanked by nothing but flat scrubland and darkness for miles, Brandon's truck ran out of gas. He pulled over to the shoulder. At 12:38 a.m. on August 9, he called his brother Kyle and told him he'd run out of fuel. Kyle said he'd come help. Brandon called Ledessa too, and reportedly told her something strange, that he was bleeding. She urged him to call 911. And what happened next has haunted investigators, internet sleuths, and Brandon's family ever since. Because 16 minutes later, Brandon made that 911 call. And what he said on it, no one can fully decipher. The 911 call lasts approximately 1 minute and 41 seconds. It has been analyzed by thousands of people online, enhanced by audio experts, and dissected frame by frame. And yet, to this day, there is no consensus on what Brandon Lawson is saying. The clearest interpretation goes something like this: "Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. We just pushed some guys over. Right here going toward Abilene on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. The guy's chasing me through the woods. Please hurry." But other listeners hear entirely different words. Some hear, "We're not talking to them." Others hear, "I totally ran into them." Some hear, "Shot the first guy." The Coke County dispatcher who took the call reportedly had difficulty understanding him too and sent a trooper to the area. But here's where it gets strange. When Kyle Lawson arrived at Brandon's truck around 1:10 a.m., a deputy and a state trooper were already there. The truck was locked. Brandon's wallet and personal belongings were inside. But Brandon? He was gone. Kyle flashed his headlights into the surrounding brush. He called Brandon's phone. At approximately 1:19 a.m., Brandon actually picked up and in a hushed whisper told Kyle he was 10 minutes away, and that he was bleeding. Then the call cut out. Kyle tried calling back multiple times. Brandon never answered again. Let that sink in. Law enforcement was physically at the scene. His brother was there. And Brandon was apparently close enough to answer his phone, but chose to hide. Why? What would make a man avoid the very people trying to help him? One theory points to the outstanding warrant. Brandon may have seen the police lights and panicked, fleeing into the brush to avoid arrest. In rural Texas, in the middle of the night, disoriented and possibly under the influence of methamphetamine, the fear of being arrested could have overridden all rational thought. But does that explain the bleeding? Does that explain the terror in his voice on the 911 call? Does that explain why he was never found? Because the search that followed was not small. Over the coming days, law enforcement and volunteers scoured the area around Highway 277. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters flew overhead. The terrain was rough, mesquite brush, ravines, rattlesnakes, but it was also relatively flat and open. For a human body to simply vanish in that landscape raised serious questions. Then there's another theory: foul play. Some researchers have pointed out that the stretch of highway near Bronte has had other incidents involving stopped vehicles and confrontations. Could Brandon have encountered someone dangerous on that road? His 911 call, depending on interpretation, could describe being chased. And the mention of bleeding, if accurate, suggests he may have already been injured before he even called 911. Brandon's family has long pushed back against the drug use narrative, arguing that it was used by authorities to avoid taking the case seriously in its early stages. LaDessa herself spent years publicly advocating for the case, insisting that whatever happened to Brandon that night went far beyond a man running from a warrant. And then there's the most unsettling detail of all. Brandon's phone pinged off a cell tower in the area until the morning of August 9th and then simply stopped. The phone either died, was destroyed, or was turned off. No further digital trace of Brandon Lawson has ever been found. No financial activity. No sightings. Nothing. A 26-year-old man, father of 4 children, evaporated from the earth between a highway shoulder and a dark tree line. What would you have done if you were Kyle that night, standing at that truck, knowing your brother was somewhere out there in the dark, bleeding, whispering, and refusing to come out? In February 2022, nearly 9 years after Brandon disappeared, his father announced that remains had been found in a remote area of Coke County. Initial reports suggested they were discovered in a field not far from where the truck was abandoned. But as of the latest confirmed information, full forensic identification and an official cause of death have been subject to agonizingly slow processing, and critical questions remain completely unanswered. Even if the remains are conclusively Brandon's, the discovery does not explain what happened that night. It does not tell us who or what he was running from. It does not decode the 911 call. It does not explain the blood. And it does not answer the most fundamental question of all: did Brandon Lawson die of exposure in the Texas wilderness, a victim of panic and disorientation? Or did something make sure he never made it out of those woods? The 911 recording is still publicly available. Thousands of people still listen to it, trying to catch a syllable, a word, a clue that everyone else has missed. And every single one of them hears something different. Maybe that's the most disturbing part. The man told us what was happening to him. He called for help. He was recorded. And we still can't understand what he said. Some cases get solved. Some cases get closed. And some cases just echo a voice on a phone line in the middle of the night, somewhere in the dark of rural Texas, saying something we'll never quite make out. That was the vanishing of Brandon Lawson. If you've listened to the 911 call and think you know what he was saying, drop your interpretation in the comments. I want to hear it. This is Obscura Files. If this case kept you watching until the end, subscribe, hit that bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. We go deep into the cases the world forgot, or the ones the world was never supposed to find. I'll see you in the next file.